Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Remote Transmission here on IPMNation.com. This is Matt Connerton, sitting here at the MCAM TV23 studio in Manchester, New Hampshire, and we're interviewing our first political figure on this particular show, Bob Giuda. How are you, sir?
Fine, Matt. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And what office are you running for?
Running for the United States House, 2nd Congressional District in New Hampshire.
Okay. And who's your main rival in this race? Because the primary's in September, right?
September 14th.
Okay.
There are 3 Republicans in the primary. Myself, Jennifer Horn, who ran very unsuccessfully last time, and Charlie Bass, a prior 6-term U.S. congressman who was ousted out of office in 2006.
I remember, yeah. So Charlie Bass is trying to reclaim his seat.
Right, he's trying to reclaim the people's seat.
Okay.
In the illustrious words of Scott Brown and those of us who believe it belongs to the folks.
Sure. And Jennifer Horn, I vaguely recall her, but maybe only vaguely because, like you said, her run was unsuccessful. And then if you win the primary, you go on to face...
Right, one of 2 Democrat rivals now,
Okay.
Katrina Sweat or attorney from Concord. Her name escapes me. McLean Custer, Annie McLean Custer.
Oh, okay.
There we go, yeah.
I'm not terribly familiar with either of them, but is Katrina Sweat, is that Dick Sweat's wife?
Yes.
Okay. Who would you rather face? Any preference?
Makes no difference.
Makes no difference?
I think, frankly, that McLean Custer will probably win the nomination.
Okay.
Because of Sweat's pro-life stance. And but that remains to be seen. They're both very well funded.
Sure.
Much of that from out-of-state money.
Sure.
Which is so much the standard here in this state. So.
Do you feel like the underdog in this race? Charlie Bass is certainly a formidable.
Yeah, I
figure.
think. We are no question an underdog. But the other side of it is you have to look at what's happening nationally in the politics and in the attitudes of the electorate.
Yeah.
Charlie Bass is, no question, has good name recognition, but this is a time for conservatives, it seems to be, and Charlie Bass is anything but a conservative, though he's trying to recast himself so, and it's humorous to watch in some senses. But
Tell me about that. In what way is he not a conservative? Or ways?
I have to look at his voting record.
Really?
Yeah, and there are numerous instances therein that demonstrate quite clearly that he is anything but a conservative Republican. In fact, he started an organization called the Main Street Republicans.
Okay, I
groups
remember that.
Both in the state House and also in Washington, D.C., which basically takes exception to some of the fundamental planks of the Republican Party.
Okay.
And says, we're Republicans too. Well, the fact of the matter is that if you profess an ideology, not that you're lockstep in it, but you need to at least to try to be somewhat consistent with what's proposed therein.
Sure.
And Charlie has deviated from that on any number of occasions in major ways.
Do you think that's because he's just not a real conservative, or do you think it's because, he's trying to appeal to the moderate, the mainstream, the swing voters, the independents?
Sure, I think it's a combination of both. But, I myself, as a conservative, have never sponsored a bill that would appeal to a more mainstream group. In other words, you have to stand on your principles and on your values. And when you look at Charlie's values, it's pretty clear that they are not conservative.
Okay. And can you give me some examples? Where do you differ from
Sure.
him?
Look at energy policy. Charlie voted against drilling in Anwar. Life. Charlie is not pro-life. He's definitely pro-choice.
I didn't know that.
Those are a couple of pretty substantial
Sure.
indicators right there.
Sure. What about as far as fiscal policy?
Well, he belonged to the Republican Revolution. Remember in '94. Which sort of the wheels kind of fell off.
Gingrich and everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if you recollect that under Clinton, he claims that they had a balanced budget, and in fact were generating a surplus largely because of the efforts of both Bush and Clinton to reduce the size of the military after the end of the Cold War. Okay, and so, but in those times, you'll find any number of pork barrel projects that were voted for by Charlie. I tell people right up front, we are borrowing over 50 cents of every dollar we spend at the federal level.
Right.
We cannot afford to be spending money on projects that are absolutely essential. And the time has come to differentiate between must-have and nice-to-have in the federal budget, as well as in our state, which is running a horrific deficit both in this term and in the next biennium. It's projected at $650 million right now. So it's a time to send people that have a track record, proven record, and the experience to lead from the bottom up, because the political managers in Washington, the heads of the parties, those who are long in tooth in their elected service, tend to have a much different view of what's necessary, and their focus being on getting reelected, as opposed to doing what's necessary to put the country back on sound financial footing. We are about 15 years, I would say, at the outside from being in the same position as a nation that Greece is in as we speak.
That's very scary.
It is.
Very scary. As far as fiscal policy, do you feel that the lack of discipline, do you think that's something specific to certain Republicans like Charlie Bass, or do you think it's more widespread?
I think it's endemic to the entire Congress.
Really?
Frankly, yeah. And I think that's what we're going to see, hopefully, in this election, is that there are no innocent parties here. It's NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Right.
Yes, we need to reduce federal spending, but don't close that defense plant in my district.
Right.
Don't close that naval base in my district. Now, that doesn't mean you run amok. Again, we have to decide what you need to have, must-haves versus nice-to-haves. One of the main criticisms I have, both of the Obama administration and of the Congress in its entirety, is the absolute failure to come forward with what I call strategic national priorities. Healthcare is not a strategic national priority.
Right.
Healthcare is an important component of quality of life. It is an important component of budgeting. Obviously, medical care is an important component of our, again, quality of life. Strategic national priorities are, for me, in the following order, these three things. First and foremost, fiscal policy. It's a disaster. You cannot borrow more than half of what you spend and expect to be around in the long term.
Right.
Second, energy policy. Okay, and third, foreign policy. Fiscal policy, just the interest on the federal debt. Just the interest on the federal debt is accruing at $1 billion a day. That's $365 billion a year, a third of $1 trillion.
Right.
Okay? Energy policy, we are sending $1 billion a day over to OPEC and other oil-producing nations that are offshore. Okay? We have the capability, if we unleash the genius of the American entrepreneur and incentivize new energy forms and to substantially reduce that. 2/3 of the energy that we use in terms of oil is spent on transportation systems, whether it's aviation or trucking or automobiles. And so there are areas there that are rife with opportunities to build efficiencies. For example, Boone Pickens' plan to go natural gas.
Right.
Okay.
You agree with his plan?
Totally.
Let me ask you this. Are you frustrated by, as someone who wants more drilling, are you frustrated by what's going on in the Gulf? Because I've heard a lot of people say, a lot of people stood up and applauded when Obama said, yes, let's drill. And he seemed to be, giving in on that. And actually, he angered a lot of environmentalists. And then this happened, what happened in the Gulf. And now all these people, and I can relate because I feel that way, all these people are kind of feeling like, oh, this was the worst possible time for this to happen just when we were about to move forward. How do you get around what's currently going on? Because now everyone is seizing on that and saying, everyone who opposes drilling says, see, this is what happens. How do you get around that?
Accidents happen, and in drilling at 5,000 feet below the surface of the sea is a pretty complex business.
Sure.
One has to understand that accidents happen. One has to understand we also have a Department of Energy with oversight and regulatory responsibility. 12,000 employees, 100,000 contractors, a $24 billion a year budget. Okay. And what has happened? What has our government done in terms of disaster relief in this case? Virtually nothing.
Right.
Just like Katrina. So what you see is just yet another demonstration of the inefficacy of government at managing anything. So BP owns this, but the other side of that is, where's the government been for the last month?
Should the White House be doing more?
I think that our Department of Energy owns this. They are the regulators who are supposed to be overseeing MME and other components of the energy structure and the regulatory capacity as well over nuclear and other things. And so the point becomes there were unquestionably violations of the code for the components that failed. Somebody didn't catch those.
Have they been under-regulating?
I would suspect that's the case.
Okay.
I would suspect that's the case. And of course, it will take a little bit of time to unravel all this. Meantime, it's 6,000 barrels a day you're pumping into the Gulf of Mexico and it's coming around the tip of Florida and going to wreak havoc environmentally. Interestingly enough, getting back to natural gas, rather than criticizing the problem and the failure of government to effectively and rapidly react to a major environmental issue, okay, is to look at the depth of water. Shallow water drilling, much safer, much more efficient, and most of your natural gas that's offshore is found in shallow water well drilling areas.
Why aren't we doing that?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. Boone Pickens and a number of other entities have been pushing to move ahead
Sure.
to get government vehicles onto natural gas. It would create amazing amounts of jobs as you build the distribution networks and the filling stations, if you will, for natural gas powered vehicles. Much cleaner in terms of pollution, no oil, much safer shallow water drilling, and totally our own resources, don't need to import any of it.
So who's in the way? Is it big oil?
Big government.
Big oil and big government go
Sure.
together, do you think?
There's always the element of collusion, and it sounds nice.
Because we heard that a lot during the Bush administration. Oh, Bush and Cheney, they're oil guys.
Well,
Do you think that's fair?
I think that public policy is set by people who are looking out for their own interests. And one can't be critical of that. What one must be critical of is when legislators cave to the interests of the special interests rather than the interests of the nation as a whole.
Right.
We had an Arab oil embargo in 1973, and I remember even days, odd days, and you could only get so many gallons or so many
I've seen
dollars.
the footage,
Sure, it was
archival
amazing.
footage of
Oh,
gas lines.
Sure.
And, yeah, oh yeah.
And so what happened? Government, with tax policy and other initiatives, incentivized the development of alternative forms of energy. Solar used to be able to get tax breaks. When that crisis was averted, when the demand and the pricing came back down to normal levels, what happened to the initiative? It petered out. So things are driven largely by a competitive market. But getting back to the legislative and regulatory issues, when you have legislators who are not cognizant of the powers available in the free market and who play to the strong side of refunding for re-election with powers that be that have lots of money, what happens is the gradual subversion of the best of intentions into what's politically expedient for the special interest.
Sure.
That said, I am always one that comes right out and says it like I believe it to be, that the reason we're in the mess we're in is largely that our citizens, who were by design when the framers founded our Constitution and our country, our citizens were by design to be the guardians and the watchdogs over Congress and the legislatures, and for the past 50 years largely have been unengaged. And so when I hear people speak of term limits, so you have a 2-year term limit on every representative in the U.S. House.
Right, you always have the option
If
to
the
vote them out.
citizen gets in and does his or her homework, there's
Right.
no more powerful force in politics than a well-informed, committed citizen.
But how do you overcome the apathy? Because I believe the apathy, and there certainly is a tremendous amount of it, I believe the apathy is, the source of that is discouragement. People feel like, it's almost a cycle, people feel like they're powerless because they see a lot of dirty politicians with their backdoor deals and the midnight pay raises and all that. But then, so they feel discouraged, but then of course by feeling discouraged, then they don't participate, allowing the cycle to continue.
That is not what made America great.
Right.
It is not what makes for success in business. When you face obstacles or you're discouraged, that's when it's time, as I learned as a Marine officer and a leader of men and women in uniform,
Sure.
as an FBI agent, as an airline captain, when chips are down and people are down, that's when leadership must manifest itself, and that's when you work harder.
Right.
You don't walk away.
Right.
When a citizen who has all the power in the Constitution at his or her fingertips when they push that ballot or X that box,
Yeah.
okay, walks away, the whole system collapses, and what we have is the product we have today.
Absolutely.
And so my admonition to those who are listening is when you're most discouraged is when our nation most needs you, because
Sure.
the problems are immense. Underlying all of the nonsense that goes on in terms of legislative outcomes is the issue of congressional ethics or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
And I'm touted as saying, and I'm on record as saying, the first bill I'll introduce if I'm elected is a constitutional amendment. Now think about that. It will probably never pass, but the constitutional amendment would disestablish the House Ethics Committee.
Okay.
Why? The House Ethics Committee is comprised of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, representatives all,
Right.
okay, who are considered better qualified than the electorate in general to adjudicate issues of ethics. Look, it isn't rocket science. If your mama wouldn't want you to do it, then you ought not be doing it, and Charlie Rangel should have been out of office a long time ago. okay?
Absolutely.
So the point
I
is
agree.
this. We do away with the fox guarding the hen house, and we reconstitute ethics committees in each of the 435 congressional districts back home, so that a representative to Washington remains accountable not to a system in Washington, but but to the citizens that sent him or her to Congress.
That's a very interesting idea.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you impanel that just like you would a jury for a trial. If someone
Sure.
mounts an accusation, then you impanel that group, they adjudicate, say it has merit or not. If not, it never sees the light of day. If it does, it sees the light of day. For frivolous accusations, which would likely be mounted by the party apparatchik from either side.
Oh, sure.
Okay?
Yep.
You establish severe criminal penalties for abuse of the trust of the American people and challenging of the ethics on frivolous grounds. And it has to be a hurtful penalty that says we're not going to play games with ethics. That,
Sure.
in and of itself, would be an incredible step forward to reestablishing faith in the system of government.
Absolutely. But you're right, it would probably never happen.
Well, but the point is, too, for example, when John Kasich ran from Ohio, it took him 13 years to get a balanced budget amendment through the House.
Yeah.
Okay? Change comes slowly, but many times, and right now especially, is an advent for new ideas and new people that are fresh and people that have experience, as I do, 6 years in the New Hampshire House, 2 years as a deputy majority leader. And I voted against leadership many times because what they espoused or what they were seeking to pass was not consistent with the principles that I believed in.
Sure.
That's what America needs. I believe America is hungry for leadership, and leadership doesn't come from the seniority-based patronage system of those who have been in Congress longest. Those are political managers. Those are political survivors.
Sure.
Leadership's coming from the freshman class this time. And the experience I garnered as a deputy majority leader of the 400-member New Hampshire House will be invaluable in leading the freshman class, building organizations, building coalitions on principles and on issues to either advance them or to stop them in their tracks if they're not good for our businesses, our people, and our institutions.
Let me ask you about healthcare reform quickly,
Sure.
because are you for some sort of reform or?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Obamacare is a disaster of immense proportions. Not long after it was passed, CBO, Congressional Budget Office, came out and said, oops, we didn't even consider the addition of 13 million people. There's so much to this. 197.
Did they revise their numbers? Because at one point they said it would actually save money.
Well, it's up over $1 trillion now.
Okay.
And so, no, it's going to cost money.
Okay.
And show me something in government that is ever, the money savings that we're talking about were like 15 or 18 years out for real. We can't predict 6 months from now what the budget's going to be, except more deficit spending. So how are we going to predict this system with 197 new bureaucracies in it? All right, so how do you fix it?
That was going to be my next
All
question.
right, how do we fix it? First of all, let's look at Obamacare. You cannot repeal Obamacare at least until 2013.
Okay.
The reason is structural. If the Republicans were to win majorities in the House and Senate, likely in the House, possible in the Senate, you would be able to pass a bill to repeal it. That bill would be met with a presidential veto, which would then require the House and the Senate to mount a 2/3 majority each.
And add
to override.
And add to that, the American people probably don't have the stomach for any more healthcare debate.
Well, but to repeal it, okay,
Sure.
I think there's a desire to do that.
Really?
Okay, but you can't do it because you'd need to win 21 seats in the Senate, and there's only 15 seats up for election. So,
Sure.
what do you do in the interim? Okay, you try to, first of all, defund it. You stop it from moving forward because the House has the power of the purse. We don't give any money to build it, so they can't build these bureaucracies. That stops this monstrosity called Obamacare from going forward. That doesn't solve the problem, but it stops the government takeover of 16% of our national economy. What needs to happen are basically in 3 major areas for healthcare. We don't have a healthcare problem. That's the first thing we have to figure out. Our healthcare system is the best in the world, and I know because I travel the world. I go to China, I go to South America, the Middle East, I go to Europe, as part of my profession as an airline captain.
Right.
And I talk to people, and I watch their systems, and I go to their hospitals, and I watch what happens. Our healthcare is the best. People come from all around the world to the United States
Sure.
for surgeries and procedures and treatments.
Our
because-
healthcare itself, but what about those who can't afford insurance?
Okay, now here's where the rub comes in. All right, we have a healthcare cost structure that is established by the government through the Medicare system. They set premium rates. They set rates rather for procedures, and those rates, a physician cannot accept Medicare patients if they charge less than those rates. That's a guaranteed floor
Sure.
on costs. Some structural issues. Most states have what's called mandated coverages, meaning if an insurance company wants to come in and offer coverage, they have to provide what the state says they must offer in terms of product. There's no freedom in the marketplace
Sure.
to offer a product that varies so that different consumers with different needs can choose different things.
Well, isn't that the crux of the problem? Because it seems to me and to a lot of people I talk to that we host a talk show on IPMNation.com called Stephen James Blake. And his argument is that all you really have to do is remove the barriers allowing the insurance companies to compete across state lines, and you'll see the cost of health insurance plummet like a stone.
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that?
I agree. That's, again, there are three areas we need to work on. One is government entanglement and government refusal to let the free market operate. One is what I call the silos. You have to buy insurance from a company in your state or register to operate in your state. It's very expensive because big insurance companies that want to operate in 50 states need 50 sets of attorneys to deal with 50 different sets of laws.
Sure.
Very expensive overhead administratively. Okay, the other part of that is, again, the mandated coverages. So open the borders to competition from companies around the country. Open the door to different types of policies with different levels of coverage on different types of afflictions or maladies or whatever. Let the market choose.
Right.
These companies don't want to go out of business. They want to stay in business and make money. That's a good thing. What's the problem is government blocks them from being competitive. So that's the first part, the competition. The second part is we need to incentivize, through tax policy, people to take care of themselves. Let's empower the consumer.
I agree.
All right?
For example, there's no focus on prevention in this country. It's all go ahead and abuse
all
yourself.
Obamacare did was to take the existing system and bureaucratize it into 197 new federal agencies. It's ridiculous. Okay?
Yeah.
No change to paradigm, no major shift on preventive or holistic medicine, just the same thing we're doing. We're just going to encapsulate it in government bureaucracies. It'll be horrible.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is empower that consumer, right? And we empower them in several ways. One, we publish records of mortality and infection rates for procedures, hospitals, and doctors. And then we tell the consumer, get Medicare cost structures out of this thing. Okay, the government has to get out of it. Let the free market find itself.
Right.
All right. If a hospital's charging too much, people aren't going to go there.
Yeah, because you don't know what anything costs until you get your bill.
That's right.
Yep.
So let the consumer have a choice. Okay. And incentivize with tax policy. If you as an individual buy health insurance for your family, I think that's a responsible thing, don't you?
Absolutely.
All right. Do you get to deduct that from your taxes, any part of it?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Nothing. And yet corporations can deduct golf club memberships and jet aircraft and so the point is, I don't have anything against corporations being able to do that.
Right.
But let's not forget that the citizens that are trying to do the right thing for their families and themselves get no break whatsoever from a very expensive component of responsible familyship.
Sure.
Okay, so that needs to change. Tax policy needs to change. Some or all of those premiums for families that don't have health insurance through work need to be deductible. Just that simple. The third part is tort reform. And you hear this talked about a great deal. And it's easy to talk about. I go a step beyond, and I found a system that I think works very well. It's the British system. Now, understand, I'm not fond of Britain or socialized medicine.
Right.
But the British system has essentially entirely eliminated frivolous lawsuits.
Really?
And here's how they did it. They said, okay, we're going to say that a person that is injured or harmed in the course of a medical procedure deserves compensation. And I think you and I and anyone else that's reasonable would agree with that.
Right, absolutely.
So they capped damages in the following way. No punitive damages. Okay? We're not going to discipline you. We're going to let the market discipline you. Okay? No punitive damages, but you can receive damages that are up to twice your expected lifetime earnings. Now, that's a pretty good deal.
Right.
Okay? And that is in addition to if we have to buy, prosthetics or, a breathing machine or whatever it might be, that's on top of that. Okay? So you receive those twice your expected lifetime earnings. That's more than enough to live on.
Sure.
Okay? The next thing is they capped attorney's fees at 15%. Okay? The average length of a case in the United States on medical malpractice is 7.5 years. In many cases, the patient's dead before it's resolved.
Sure.
Why?
Sure.
Because it's in the interest of the lawyers that charge $300, $400, $500 an hour to do a
Drag it
motion and a
out.
pleading and to drag it and to stretch it and and so the point is the incentive is to not solve it, is to not settle it, is to drag it out. Right? And so lawyers know going in the best you're going to get is 15% of a number that's easily determined. And the actuarial tables are out there to determine what your expected earnings are for any profession or any trade or any calling. So that's there. And the third part is this, that the attorneys and the plaintiff, okay, if they lose, pay the legal fees of the winner. Now, I'll tell you that there's some concern I have about that, because there are people that are poor and maybe don't have the most high-powered attorneys with big, deep pockets.
Sure.
That might not take a good case because they're afraid of the consequence if they lose.
Mm-hmm.
So we can mitigate that, and that's when you're getting into the weeds. But conceptually, we've got to limit the tort. We've got to reform tort law in that sense, and make it so that it is not the legal system, and it's not the hospitals or doctors. It's the patient that's the beneficiary of our efforts. Mm-hmm. So those interests, they're high-powered interests, lots of money, and they work in the legislative arena to dissuade legislators from passing that kind of legislation. But those three things. Open it up to the market, incentivize it with tax policy, and tort reform would do substantial amount of good in reducing the costs of health insurance. Getting government out of setting costs with the price fix, I call it, of Medicare, would do a great deal towards the free market and allowing it to operate.
Right.
Good hospitals get better. Bad hospitals either improve or go away. Same with doctors. Good ones get better. Lousy ones go away, and the system works. Every time we let the free market work, no matter what the venue, it always produces a less expensive, higher quality product to the benefit of the consumer.
Let me ask you this, and I hadn't planned on asking this, but your answer on health reform, for example, it's very well thought out, and you seem to have very specific plans and very specific ideas. Is it a challenge, in a way? Does it make it more challenging to campaign when you have such a specific plan? Because in the one sense, you would think it would be easier because you actually have ideas to bring to the table. But on the other hand, we live in this sort of soundbite media culture where you really have to condense everything down, so that people can get it quickly and sort of digest it quickly. And I can understand why a lot of politicians rely on talking points, because the media has made it impossible to talk beyond that. Do you find it challenging? I mean, obviously, on IPMNation.com, it's a very open forum, and we're sitting here, and you have the time and freedom to say whatever you wish, but do you find it challenging when you're out doing media appearances or at a debate where you have a very finite amount of time to express your ideas? Is that difficult for you to...
No, because, you learn to, and I guess this is the experience I garnered in 6 years in the New Hampshire House.
Yeah.
When you get down and speak on the floor to stop a bill or in a committee, on the floor of the House, you got 2 minutes. You go beyond that, the eyes glaze over, and you've lost them.
Yeah.
And so the point becomes you learn to condense the what I call the power bullet points that are going to get your argument and your message out into a very concise. One of the problems we have as a country is that our attention span is very short, and we want that 30-second soundbite to fix the entire every problem known to civilization.
Well, hence my comment about repealing Obamacare. Does the country have the attention span to do anything more with that? You know what I mean? I don't know.
It comes back to that issue of what are the expectations of the citizen under this thing called the Constitutional Republic that was set up a couple 100+ years ago.
Right.
And again, when citizens disengage, and whether it's because they don't take any interest at all or because they want 30-second sound bites to solve problems that have been 200 years in the making, the citizen's not doing his job. We need that citizen in there because common sense comes from ordinary people. There is very little in the way of common sense that ever comes out of Washington or Congress. You just look at what's coming down the pike on these things, and you shake your head and say, where do these people come up with it? Because it's the tortured logic of a system that doesn't have the benefit of the common sense, the sweat, and the interest of the American public, which we're supposed to serve.
You've said that a couple of times, what's coming down the pike. What concerns you most? Is it Obamacare, or what are you...
Oh, there are any number of things. A thing called SAFE, a banking act that I was just reviewing this morning, that requires, it essentially, and I'm getting a better read on this from my counsel, it essentially says that if you as a private individual wanted to lend somebody money for a mortgage on their home, you can't do it. It's against the law.
Really?
They are taking private lending out of the entirety of the mortgage spectrum by law.
Really?
And the fact of the matter is that it wasn't the private lending that caused the meltdown. It was the public lending. It was the banks running fast and loose. It was the investment houses running fast and loose with regulators that weren't and should have been. And what happens is they cast this big net. This is a huge power grab. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, at the federal level, went to the 50 states and said, you either accept this and pass legislation that uses this language, okay, or we will take over your banking systems. And I'm thinking to myself, this is no better than McCain-Feingold. It is an incredible breach of constitutional rights. First Amendment, Commerce Clause, pick anything. But First Amendment right to free speech says I can use my money as I see fit. Okay, when they start restricting how you can spend your money, how you can invest it, saying you have to be a licensed person to be able to make a personal deal one-to-one between two private individuals, no. That's gone way beyond, but it's happening everywhere. There's a proliferation of laws. I was down in D.C. with Americans for Tax Reform last week.
Yeah.
Proliferation of laws that make it criminal to do things, but do not stipulate that you have to have the criminal intent. So if you inadvertently drink a glass of water in a place where water's outlawed and you didn't know it, you're still going to jail.
Right.
Those kinds of things are proliferating at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
And people largely are unaware of them because they generally don't impact you directly in the course of your everyday life.
Sure.
But when they come home in totality, what we see is the conversion of a democratic republic, a constitutional republic, into a socialist state at an alarming rate and with incredibly bad consequences.
What about illegal immigration? I've noticed a lot of Republicans seem to have abandoned that issue, and certainly during 8 years of Bush. I mean, Bush really was pretty liberal on that issue, in my opinion. What are your thoughts? Do you care? Or do you
Interesting you mentioned. I just put up my final thoughts on my website, www.bobgiuda.com, yesterday.
Yeah.
Very simply this, okay? Either we're a nation of laws, or a nation of laws that get interpreted for convenience of men. Now, you can say it's heartless, but you need to build a wall. You don't have a border if you don't. My wife and I happened to be down at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It's about 15 miles from the Mexican border. When our son-in-law went off to Afghanistan. Our son-in-law off to Afghanistan Easter weekend.
Yeah.
And while we're sitting at Denny's eating, Border Patrol and 2 cops' cars come up and pop 4 people that are illegals doing drugs in the parking lot.
Sure.
Dressed in black, Mexican gang members.
Yeah.
And the problem is not so much the immigration, it's the immigration of the drug cartels, of the gangs, of the crime rates down there. Phoenix is now the number 2 kidnap capital in the Western Hemisphere, behind Rio de Janeiro. 25% of the prisoners in Arizona's state prisons are illegal immigrants.
Wow.
Okay?
That's staggering.
34,000 felonies committed last year by illegal immigrants in Arizona. Okay, and so here's what we need to do. You need to build a wall. And you make it a real wall.
Sure.
Okay, and you need to patrol it with Border Patrol people that have the facilities and the personnel manning levels to do the job right.
Right.
We need to streamline like crazy. We need to major overhaul the existing legal immigration system so it doesn't take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
We have technologies, we have all kinds of things that are not being done. So that arcane system almost needs to be scrapped and a whole new one put in place. It's much quicker.
Sure, absolutely.
We need to stop, we need to repeal Social Security-based laws that do things like make the child of an illegal immigrant a U.S. citizen. I'm sorry, should not be. That incentivize a woman who comes here and gets pregnant and delivers a child here in the U.S., then can collect Social Security, TANF, a temporary aid, temporary in quotes, aid to needy families for 18 years as an illegal immigrant.
Sure.
And so we need to stop incentivizing people to come here, and we need to hammer employers who hire illegals. And I mean hammer them.
Right.
Okay?
But what do we do about the people who are already here?
Okay? We don't have the resources, nor should we go on a witch hunt.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I hear a lot of Republicans utter this delusional idea that, sure, we can round 20 million people up.
Here's how it works, okay? If you're an illegal, first of all, you wouldn't have a job if the employer wasn't breaking the law.
Right.
All right, so there's one barrier. As we find people, whether it be because they committed a crime, in which case they are summarily tried or sent out of the country,
right?
Okay, where we have a wall that you can't get back in,
right?
You're sent out of the country, you're deported, or imprisoned and then deported, however that would work out. When we find people through other interactions, whether it be applying for federal benefits, and oh my gosh, this is an illegal, okay, that person then is ejected with their family from the country. I'm sorry.
Sure.
It's not nice, but my job is not to protect Mexican citizens. My job is to protect America, America's businesses, America's people. The cost of illegal immigrants on our medical systems, on our jail systems, on our economic system is in the trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars since the time this problem really manifested itself a few years back. And so it costs us tens of billions of dollars every year. Emergency room visits by people that don't have medical insurance because they're working undercover, but they show up at a hospital Hospital doesn't ask them, are you a U.S. citizen? They're required by law to take them.
Sure.
Instead of going to a doctor's office where they can get Social Security or that information that illegals don't have,
Right.
now it's on the emergency room, and guess what? Defensive medicine, because of the need for tort reform, if you skin your knee, the next thing you know, you're getting an MRI because they got to cover themselves. So the expenses are horrific.
But now, what do you do about specifically about the children who are born here? I mean, you can't revoke their citizenship, can you?
Well, we need to change that law. We need to not grant citizenship to kids that are the product of illegals, immigrants. I'm sorry, but it's not a perfect world. Now, if the child wants to stay here as a citizen and the parents get ejected, well, that's up. That's. I think you take the family in its entirety,
Now,
and you send them out, okay, and you give them the opportunity, okay, to get in line and come back in.
Okay.
Unless they've done something criminal.
Right.
All right? And you don't deny them access to America, you just make them go, get in line, and come in the right way, which if you had a system that was working the way it should, would take 2 or 3 months.
What about the idea that it never really went anywhere, but a lot of Republicans, more moderate Republicans, seem to at least warm to the idea at some point that you fine the people, you allow those people to pay a fine. So instead of actually deporting them, you let them stay, but they have to pay a fine. And at that point, they're then on, or they can go on a path to citizenship.
I'll be happy to do that after we get the wall built.
Yeah.
Again, the point becomes you don't have a boundary.
So is the first priority the border?
First priority is secure the border. Look at it the other way around. You remember first aid when you were a Boy Scout or back in school, right?
I was never a Boy Scout.
All right, but what's the first thing they used to teach you?
Clean the wound.
Bleeding, breathing, shock.
Okay.
Those are the three, right? Bleeding.
Yeah.
So you stop the hemorrhage.
Stop the bleeding,
We got an invasive wound, 890 odd miles long,
Yeah.
through which hundreds of thousands of people are coming.
Yeah.
And are purloining benefits meant for U.S. citizens and are destroying the benefit system that we have.
Yeah.
Because they don't pay into it, but they sure use a lot of it.
Why do liberals want the border to just be open and allow these people come in? Why do you think that is?
Because they're going after Hispanics. It's not only liberals, there's Republicans, there's conservatives
Oh, sure.
too.
I mean,
Okay?
Bush was very liberal on
It's about getting
immigration.
reelected.
Yeah.
Think about this. Look at the legalization piece, the amnesty piece. That's going to happen. There's going to be an attempt to do that. That's 13 million votes.
Yeah. Was Reagan wrong to do that when he did that?
I think he was wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. Compassion is fine, but we are a nation of laws. And if you break them, there's a consequence.
Here's my argument for compassion. I'd be interested to just get your thoughts on what I think. I think the reason we got to where we are now with this particular issue is because I think for decades we've kind of had this, we haven't enforced the border, even though we certainly could. I mean, we could have built a wall a long time ago, but I think the reason we don't, and it kind of gets back to what you talked about Washington doing what's best for themselves and not for the people. I think it's because what we've really done is we've talked out of both sides of our mouth where we've pretended to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, you can't come over. But what we've actually done is we've sort of played this game where we say, okay, you Mexicans, you have to stay on that side, even though, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we have thousands and thousands of businesses here that would love to hire you for cheap labor, but no, you have to stay over there. Psst, okay, nobody's looking, come on over. I mean, I think that's where my compassion comes from on this particular issue, because I feel like we haven't been sincere about our immigration policy, and Mexicans know that because...
But I don't disagree.
Yeah.
But the price for that, the cost for that should not be borne on the backs of the American taxpayer.
But do you think the way we got here may be that both Republicans and Democrats, so many of them are owned by the corporations who want these people here? Because clearly there are thousands, God only knows how many thousands of businesses want the cheap labor, yeah, especially, you see it in the restaurant industry and in factories. And they're the ones contributing to both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. Do you think that's how we got here? That's just my theory, and
I don't know.
Or does it matter how we got here?
It really doesn't matter to me. We got here through intellectual dishonesty.
Sure.
Of one sort or another.
Right.
Okay, and the point is, let's just take a look at what's happening over in Pakistan and Afghanistan. They don't have a wall over there. It's kind of like
Right.
this, okay?
Right.
We also have terrorist things that we concern ourselves with coming in through that southern border, okay?
Yeah.
It is a border that must be sealed.
Sure.
That's simple. There's
Sure.
no other way to say it.
Sure.
We're walking around talking about biometric data on driver's license and all this. It's like, come on, guys, you got this 1,000-mile long wound.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and you're talking about harassing or harnessing or further intruding into the privacy of the law-abiding because you don't have the courage to do what must be done to stop those who are breaking the law.
Yeah.
That's what government does. And
Yeah.
you look at TSA, Transportation Security Administration, go to the airport, right? Take off your shoes. Why? Because somebody stuck bomb stuff in their shoes. Well, okay, does that make you any safer? No.
No.
Okay? I mean, the government is so full of these things that they are always reactionary, and they are reluctant to do that which needs to be done that would solve the problem.
You mentioned Afghanistan. Should we be there? Should we have left by now? Should we have gone to begin with?
We will not achieve victory in Afghanistan in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of reasons for that. Now, I will tell you this. In this race, I am the only military veteran. I'm a Naval Academy graduate, Marine Corps officer. I was an FBI agent. I know quite a little bit about security and also about military and strategies and so forth. You study it intensely for 4 years.
Sure, yeah.
And there are a number of reasons that I believe the strategy in Afghanistan will not achieve victory. And here's one. Now, I'll go down them for you. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Sure,
because,
sure.
again, it's not a 30-second
No,
soundbite.
it's an important issue.
What we're doing in Afghanistan under the name of overseas contingency operations, whatever that means, okay, is essentially nation building.
Right.
We are, yes, going after the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but we are also building schools and hospitals and trying to establish something that has never been there. And the reason that we're trying to do that is because we're trying to establish a democracy.
Yeah.
You won't have one there. And the reason is a democracy requires a middle class, a strong middle class. They've never had one.
Sure.
Okay? There isn't one, and we're not going to establish it in our lifetime. Okay? That's one reason it's not achievable.
Right.
Second reason is that the existing power structure that's been there for, 4,000 years or so consists of tribal warlords. And that's how they do business over there. And just as we didn't want a centralized government of the king, okay, messing with our individual colonies and our rights and stifling us, they are not going to settle for a centralized government. Never have, never will.
You can't force democracy at the point of a gun.
Cannot.
Right.
All right. Third reason, this overseas contingency ops, which our dear president doesn't want to call a global war on terrorism, is part of this global war on terrorism, which by its very nature is unwinnable and unsustainable. You can't win wars on isms.
Right.
We need to fight a global war on terrorists. All right? And to do that, you don't use a 150,000 person conventional army in a nation that's defined by borders, okay, wearing uniforms, because our enemy knows no nation, has no borders, wears no uniform, and is sworn to the destruction of Western civilization.
Yes.
Right? How do we integrate all this? Right? We don't need conventional forces over there. Okay? We're not going to build a nation of Afghanistan. It's got nothing but opium for 90%. 90% of the world's opium. It's got very little else to offer.
So you think we should leave that country?
We should stop trying to fight a global war on terrorists in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Yes. Pull our conventional forces back. Most. We would like a forward operating base. Work that out with whatever you can do over there.
Sure.
We need to tie our foreign policy to third world countries to a proviso that says this foreign aid that you're getting, which incidentally is not a great percentage of our budget. It's a pretty small percentage of our total budget at the federal level.
Yeah.
But when we're giving you foreign aid as a third world country, that foreign aid is the fruits of success of Western civilization. We are fighting an enemy whose avowed intention is the death and destruction of Western civilization. So if you want the benefits of what we know and do and live, then you have to participate, and here's how you participate. If we become aware with credible intelligence of the existence of a cell, a training camp, or a finance operation in your country, we are going to take it out, and we're going to tell you as we do it.
Right.
We're not going to ask your permission. We're not going to take your country. We're not going to do a joint operation, which always leak and always have dismal results.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to take the best forces in the world, Delta Force, Navy SEAL teams, and Special Operations Groups, which train for this year-round, 365 days a year. They're in intense training for this kind of mission. And we're going to go eliminate the problem. We're going to come right back out of your country. If that is objectionable to you, then two things happen. One, you get no foreign aid. And two, your country goes on the terrorist watch list. Just that simple.
Right.
That's the way we need to conduct it. We are the shining city on the hill. but we are also the target of the most potent terrorist organizations in the history of mankind.
Absolutely.
And you either fight a war or you play patty cake. And in this case, fighting the war means let's define the objective. Our military is the best in the world. I say
Right.
that. I've got sons-in-law both who are combat veterans. One's in Afghanistan as we speak. Okay? But what we've done is a grave disservice to the military by giving them a mission that was never within their design. Militaries are destructive organizations. And when you take a trooper and you put him in a situation where today he's building a hospital, tomorrow he's handing out a lollipop, and the day after that he just got blown up by an IED, that is not fair to them.
Sure.
And the other point is this is not a sustainable war in terms of the $5.5 to $6 billion a month that we know about,
Yeah.
that it's costing us. And remember my priorities, okay? Fiscal policy, $1 billion a day in adding interest to the national debt. It's $1 billion a day more.
Yeah.
Energy policy, $1 billion a day going to OPEC and other countries, a lot of whom don't like us. That's
Right.
$2 billion.
Right.
War in Afghanistan, nominally $6 billion a month. What's that? About $200 million a day. So what you got is $2.2 billion a day in projects or in areas that are decimating our future, that are forcing us to borrow money from China to fight a war in Afghanistan.
Right.
I mean, and it's ludicrous. We have to consolidate our global military footprint.
What about Iraq?
Iraq, I think, was a wrong war.
I agree.
I don't think there was justification to go in there.
Yeah. So you would have voted against it
yes.
had you been. You would have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But now that we're there, what do we do about that?
Well,
Because-
Iraq has a possibility, a strong possibility of
so?
success.
You
Here's
think so?
why. Iraq had a strong, vibrant middle class. They had intelligentsia and academia and hospitals and universities,
Sure.
all this thing. Now, they fled when Saddam and the boys got stupid,
Right.
but they're all coming back.
Right.
And even though you see these horrific explosions every now and again, okay,
Yeah.
still, the machinery for the middle class, the structure is there and it's being rebuilt rapidly. Okay, so they have an opportunity. Iraq has this thing called oil. Afghanistan does not.
Good point. All Afghanistan has is drugs. Now, but as far as Iraq, should we put a date on when we leave, or have we done that? I'm a little fuzzy on if Obama.
Well, we're
issued
pulling
some
out
sort of date.
combatants, supposedly pulling out combatants, but
Yeah.
we'll leave advisory groups and teams there.
Right.
Okay? And so I think we're definitely in what I would call a retrograde aspect of that operation in Iraq. We're
Yeah.
drawing down our troop strengths there. And we always, of course, can reserve the right, if Iraq as a government decides that they need help. You've got NATO sitting there that is sort of morphing into more than NATO used to be.
Sure.
There are any number of things that are available organizationally, structurally, that are doable. We can always go back in. But the point is, we have to make Iraqis take responsibility for Iraq's future.
Right.
And, Maliki wouldn't be my choice,
Yeah.
but he is the choice that's there, and they work with him. I was sort of concerned that President Bush and the State Department and the Congress worked against breaking Iraq up into 3 component states. The Kurds up
Well,
north.
that was the Biden proposal, right?
Yeah,
He wanted to break
exactly.
it up into 3.
And I think that made a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
Now, the argument was, well, how do we divide up the oil? Well, it isn't rocket scientist. I guarantee you I could give that problem to a 5th grade arithmetic student in the honors program, and he'd figure it out in about 2 hours. It isn't rocket science. You take all the oil revenues, you put them in a pot, and you divide it per capita.
Sure.
Just that simple.
Yeah.
Okay? It is a national thing. You have 3 states in that country. It's a national, the Kurds, the Shiites, and the Sunnis.
Right.
It's a national resource per capita division. Sarah Palin did it in Alaska with the oil companies. Everybody
Yeah.
up there gets $1,000 a year, or whatever the number is.
Yeah.
So the point, it isn't rocket science, but we get all tied up in how important we are, and it has to be our way. And as Reagan said, problems get solved when people don't care who gets credit.
Right.
Focus on defining the problem properly, articulating the solutions, and coming up with alternatives, evaluating them honestly and objectively, and then deciding the best course of action moving forward. Something this Congress and this President have been incapable of doing. And our country, as a rule, has suffered. As George Washington's farewell address was, I consider, one of the 3 most important pieces of political documentation ever written.
Sure.
The Declaration, the Constitution, and that address. And he warns about a few things in there, one of which is to avoid a party system.
Right.
Because ultimately the interests of the party trump the interests of the nation. You produce legislative gridlock, and nothing's getting done And I would invite you and the interested observer to articulate if that isn't in fact pretty much where we are.
Let me ask you this, because you've been in both the military and in law enforcement. Some say that terrorism, part of the problem is we shouldn't treat it as a military problem. We should be treating it as a law enforcement problem. Do you agree with that?
No,
or?
totally disagree with that.
Really?
Yeah. These combatants, these enemy combatants, are not subject to the Geneva Accords. And they are transnational, and even if in our country, we aren't finding an awful lot of them that don't have international ties, whether they are from a foreign country that might be Muslim in its majority or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. But this is not a crime. This is an act of war. A crime, generally speaking, is a crime against a person or a property.
Right.
An act of war is intended to bring death and destruction, to bring down a nation. And that is the avowed intention of the combatants. So let's put them where they belong.
So no Miranda rights for
No
these
Miranda
guys?
rights,
Okay.
none. No, sir. No, sir.
Close Guantanamo, keep it open?
Keep it open, and I think you're finding it's being kept open.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, that which Bush and his very, very carefully thought out counsel, okay, went through and determined was that these folks aren't criminals. Okay, they are war criminals, or I should say they are enemy combatants.
Right.
They don't fall under Geneva. Okay, and so we need they're in a status of their own, and we need a facility to deal with that reality.
Sure.
That would be Guantanamo. Isolated, okay, away from the mainstream. Now, one of the problems I had was that it should never take 8 years to get to a trial. So I have concerns in that sense.
Certainly,
I think that is
That's a problem.
a problem.
Yeah.
And so that is addressable. It's a matter of process. But closing Gitmo, I think it's going to be there for a while, and I think it needs to be.
Sure.
Trying this guy, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in New York, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it was a terrible and very expensive idea. I'm only going to ask you this quickly
Sure.
because you brought her up, but Sarah Palin, do you think she's qualified to be president? Should she run?
She's no more or less qualified than anyone else, and she's more qualified than a lot. I thought it was heinous the way the media mistreated her.
Do you think she was the right choice for McCain?
That I don't know, because I don't know what his logic was. That's a
Right.
And seriously, he
Right.
may have had a reason for it.
Yeah.
But she was a very effective governor that went against the Republican establishment as a Republican, rooted out corrupt politicians and sent them away, put the oil companies where they needed to be with respect to their use of Alaska's resources and their obligation to pay for the use of to the citizens. She got the job done.
Sure.
Okay? What did Barack Obama do?
Well, he was a community organizer.
Community organizer. He was a state
Yeah.
senator. He
Yeah.
was, and no executive experience. None.
right.
Not a shred. And are we seeing it today? Because his whole mantra, his whole focus is on socialization of free enterprises in the areas of healthcare, and banking, and insurance, and it's coming down the pike at rapid rates.
Do you think that's the end game?
I do, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. So much of this, if not stopped in this election cycle in the next 2 years, is going to be cast in stone and not reversible.
Sure.
And that then is essentially the conversion of a constitutional republic into a socialist democracy with devastating results. You're already watching companies write down over $1 billion for the health care as soon as it was done. And then what happened? Henry Waxman, okay, that business whiz in the House, called the CEOs of the companies that did the write-down based on the health care passage, and then decided, well, maybe I better not, because they're absolutely right, because the accounting rules, again, one hand doesn't know what the accounting rules that were passed years ago required these companies to do it.
Right.
But the folks we have in Washington, D.C. are so out of touch with the ground realities of America, of families and the struggles they're doing. They say unemployment is 10%. There's 154 million working people in the United States. Okay, 18% of them are out of work.
That's what Stephen James Blake says on his show, is that, that obviously that 10% figure doesn't count all the people who've given up.
Right.
And all the people who are just underemployed, and there's a lot of that. I know a lot of people in that situation. Before we start to wrap up, you told me something interesting before we started the interview that I wanted to touch on again about, because you're also an airline pilot, and you were telling me about when you went to get your pilot's license?
Yeah, today I had a little bit of free time,
Yeah.
and which is not the norm.
Yeah.
And so I was in Concord and had an event there that I was participating in. I just on the spur of the moment, went out to Concord Airport,
Yeah.
where in 1969, I actually got my private pilot's license.
Yeah.
And I sat in a virtually vacant municipal terminal at the Concord Airport.
Yeah.
And just reminisced. I've been flying for 43 years, basically 41 years, something like that, 40 plus years.
Yeah.
I started working at airports when I was 12. I actually worked as a busboy in a small restaurant at a private airport, so I could get close enough to see airplanes.
Oh, no kidding.
And it
Yeah.
worked from there, and here today I fly as a captain on a 777
Yeah.
around the world. And
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate, but I've had the privilege of serving my country in uniform as a Marine, as a law enforcement person, as a special agent of the FBI. I served my community as a selectman and chairman of the board. Ethics was very serious. We removed a standing tax collector and town clerk for cause.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very difficult process, painful but necessary.
Yeah.
Stood 3 terms in the state legislature, voluntarily term limited myself after 3.
Did you?
And left. In those 3, I was 4 years on the Ways and Means Committee and 2 years as Deputy Majority Leader of the House.
Yeah.
I try to tell people that, look, in this election, in the 2nd CD in New Hampshire, you have 3 candidates on the Republican side. Okay, you have one who has 12 years of congressional experience at a time when our nation requires conservative values to be brought back to Washington, and that person is anything but conservative by his own voting record.
Sure.
We have another person that's never held an elected office, okay,
Yeah.
and yet wants to run for a Congress in which rules of procedure and motions and the functioning and the process of legislation is completely unknown to her.
Yeah.
Okay? And then you have this guy, me, who has served in a legislature of 400 members, only 35 short than the federal Congress,
Yeah.
the U.S. House, Deputy Majority Leader of the House, because of the leadership capabilities that I demonstrated in working to pass legislation that was good for our people, our businesses, and our institutions, and to block legislation that was bad. And
Yeah.
on one day, a person would be with me, and another day they'd be working against me on an issue.
Sure.
But the point is that it requires a very quick study of people and an intuitive sense to be able to understand how to best present the point of view you would like a person to ascribe to in a vote that's coming up.
Right.
To build those coalitions, to exercise that kind of influence is critically important at this juncture in our nation's history and in this Congress, this coming Congress.
Yeah.
I've demonstrated that I have those capabilities and those skill sets. I've done it, I think, quite well, as my voting record and the accomplishments of the legislatures that I was part of will demonstrate. And that is desperately needed, because leadership in the Congress that's coming up in the next 2 years is not going to come from the political managers at the top.
Right.
It's going to come from the freshman class, and hopefully that class will have a number of people in it, myself included, who have some significant experience in process, in people, in legislation, and in keeping conservative values as the guiding light for our governance.
Do you think it's going to be a Republican year?
I think that it will be a Republican year. I don't think we're going to see it to the degree that many people are thinking we will.
Yeah.
If you look at the last 4 primaries that happened in the last week or 2,
Sure.
get some indication there that,
Do you think it's more an anti-incumbency year?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think anti-incumbency is, and I frankly, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Throw the bums out, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? Again, it comes back to the citizen has to do his and her job. That's the watchdog. I tell folks when I speak, if you believe that being a good citizen is raising your family, paying your taxes, and not getting speeding tickets, you can do that in Red China.
Sure.
You can do that in Russia. Our nation depends. It is critically important at this point in our history that citizens not only engage for sound bites, but citizens engage the entirety of the process and not only elect people, but watch them and talk to them and communicate and share ideas. Okay, my commitment to my constituents, should I be elected, is I'm going to hold a town meeting in the district every 6 weeks.
Really? Good.
Yep, every 6 weeks. And it'll be at different places because it's 2/3 of the state. It's a huge district.
Sure.
But that's 16 meetings in 24 months. I will be close to the people. I'll be our people's representative to Washington, not Washington's delegate back to here.
Right.
I happen to believe I should be accountable to the folks that elected me, hence my ethics reform initiative.
Yeah.
And also, I've got a proven track record of conservative fiscal policy, which is lethal at the present rate of expenditure at the federal level. We're in deep, deep trouble. We'll be
Yeah.
following Greece within 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, can you mention your website and,
Sure,
and
thanks.
anything, if you have a Facebook page and any of that?
Yeah, I have Facebook, and it's Bob Giuda.
Okay.
And
Oh, can you, I was going to say.
BOBGIUDA.
Okay.
And I have, the website is www.bobgiuda.com.
Okay.
I also give folks my phone number to my home office. I'm the only one that answers that phone. If I don't, leave a message and I get back, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of calls.
Sure.
But that number is 603-764-5869. 603-764-5869. And I offer that to people because I believe, as a representative, you have the obligation to answer the questions, the hard ones, when people
Yeah.
put them to you.
Yeah.
And I tell them, I may not tell you what you want to hear. I will tell you what I believe our country needs.
Right.
Okay? It's your job as a citizen to decide if I'm the person that should be there, then do it. And if I'm not, be honest to yourself and vote for the right person in your mind.
Sure.
Our country depends on that integrity. It doesn't depend on the horse race that elections have become. I think I'm going to try to vote for I think is going to win.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because that produced the meltdown that we have in our legislation and federal level right now.
Sure.
Emotional responses are deadly in the realm of patriotism.
Right.
We need people that are thinking about things and don't emotionally run to anything but, and so be very, very careful because our country is teetering on the brink of socialism as we speak.
All right. Well, Bob Giuda, thanks very much for being here with us
Thanks
today.
for the privilege of speaking.
Been a
and
great interview.
Been my pleasure.
All right. Thank you.